Yeah, we're.
Talk to me about anything he and that guy got sort of elder, my place.
Yeah, I talked to Wayne this morning. Nope, no, it's just they're going to try to do their. And if there's a problem, he's going to let us know, and we'll do whatever we need to do. But by the first of the year, we're going to find something else. We're going to probably start sending it. They're going to probably start sending it to Emil in Miami, and then he has a bank account down there, and he'll save it up. Cuba, and there's no limit as to how much he can take in.
Has he lived here all that time?
Well, kind of back and forth, kind of back and forth. So anyway, that's what that was about.
Well, he can't buy a battery for his bicycle. I got electric bicycle or something. Can I send him some money from here?
Yeah, he can get it in Miami and take it in.
Well, who?
Emil can. Yeah, Emil can buy it in Miami and take it in when he goes,
You don't need to just send him the money. He can buy it.
Yeah, we send Emil the money and he'll buy it in Miami. Okay, we're ready to start. Hope you're having a good week and things are going well. And make sure I'm on here. Couple of updates, and we didn't cover a lot of announcements this past Sunday because of Family Day, so I need to kind of get caught up on those, and then we'll get right back into our study. Remember the update on our pictorial directory, and each family is to have a packet, and it'll have a data profile for each family member, and if your last name begins A through the letter P, you can pick that packet up on the table here behind here in the rear foyer and get that filled out and turned back in. If you have a teenager that's going to Chattanooga this Saturday, you're reminded, first off, sign up and let Daniel know they're going, but the bus will leave 7:30 Saturday morning, and they'll need money for food. So get them fixed up with that if you've got a young person that's wanting to go. Please remember the wedding shower honoring Ben Buckaloo and Madeline, and I'm going to butcher this last name, Frey and, well, anyway, you can read it in the bulletin. Anyway, Sunday, October the 26th, 1:30 to 3:30 in the fellowship hall. And they're registered at zola.com, wedding, Benjamin and Madeline. I know you remembered that. So anyway, gifts do not have to be wrapped, but just main thing, come that afternoon from 1:30 to 3:30 on the 26th of October. And it's crazy to already be talking about the end of October, but it'll be here before we know it. On the 29th, that'll be our 5th Wednesday night singing. So plan on being here first for the singing, and then afterward, our annual trunk or treat for the kids will be in the upper parking lot after our Wednesday night singing on October the 29th. Teens are reminded that this Sunday is the deadline to sign up for the fall retreat. The cost for that event is $90, so parents, be mindful of that. These are all the announcements that we have. As far as we know, we do not have anybody in the hospital or awaiting surgery. Now, Virginia Gullion did have outpatient surgery today on her foot, but she is back home and doing very well. So that was the only one that I heard about a while ago. Are there any others? Guys, did y'all cover any in the men's prayer group? She did. Okay. Who did? Jeanette Mara. Okay, yeah, that's what threw me. Okay, Jeanette had surgery today. Okay, let me make a note of that. Kathy, did you have your hand up? Yeah, you did. I thought you were pointing. It's like an auction. Yeah, sold. Yeah. All right, Jeanette, is she at home? As far as you know, Jeanette is. Okay. All right. So remember Jeanette Mara and Virginia Gullion. Of course, we always want to continue to remember those that are having, Vicki Moore continuing her treatments. M's granddaughter in Michigan, of course, continuing her treatments. And Brenda was telling me a while ago that Mike Penn is still battling because they gave him the wrong antibiotic, and so they're trying to get that squared away. But yes, continue to remember Mike as well. Let's bow. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. We thank you for the opportunity anytime we can study from your word. We're very mindful, Father, of those that have recently undergone surgeries and procedures. We pray for Jeanette and for Virginia in a very, very special way, that they would see improvement very, very quickly and without further incident. Likewise, Father, for those who have had rounds of treatment for cancers, and we pray for Vicki Moore and for Mike Penn and others. We have many, Father, who are confined at home, and we pray for them. We're so thankful, Father, for the schedule and things that we have in place for upcoming events as we close out the last quarter of this year. And as always, we pray that everything we do, the motivation, the reason for doing that is because we want to see the kingdom advance, and we want to see your church grow. All these things we ask in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, open back to the second chapter of the book of Revelation as we continue our series on looking at the seven churches. And I was talking to Daniel. He's doing this with the teenagers, and he asked me today, he said, where are y'all? I said, well, where are you? And he said, well, we're in Thyatira, which is right there. And I said, well, we're halfway between here and we're going to end up there in just a few moments. But yeah, I realize it took us three Wednesday nights to get through Ephesus, but there's so much there. There's just a whole lot there, and there's a lot in this next section from the church at Smyrna. And so we're going to be looking at chapter 2, reading verses 8 through 11. So if you want to turn there, and we're going to basically take the same approach that we've taken with Ephesus. We're just going to try to speed it along a little bit, if that's all right. We'll back up then to verse 8. To the angel of the church in Smyrna write the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you're rich. And the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who conquers shall not be hurt by the second death. And so we, like I said, we looked, actually took a couple of weeks looking at the beautiful, just unbelievable ruins of the city of Ephesus, which are still going on. The contrast is Smyrna doesn't have any. The ruins that we'll see of Smyrna, I can show you in just a couple of slides. This is an idea of what they thought at the time the city proper of Smyrna may have looked like. The harbor, and that's not it, that's just where the boat's tied off. The harbor itself was about 35 miles. Huge harbor. And, we talked about Ephesus and how the Cayster River, of course, flowed into the harbor of Ephesus, which there is no harbor now because the river had silted up, and you're probably at least 20 plus miles from the ancient city to the coastline now. But this is based on descriptions. The amphitheater here that they had at Smyrna probably would have seated about 20,000. And that came into play, at Ephesus when Paul was there, and the uproar over the silversmiths and how Paul had the nerve to get up and say that Artemis or Diana was a fake, and that set things off. And it just undoubtedly was must have been just a beautiful city. Marcus Aurelius later on would call Smyrna the jewel of Asia. It was, and we'll talk about the city in just a few moments, but just to give you an idea from that to this, that's it. All of the other ruins, and I mentioned this last week, the modern day Turkish city of Izmir is built over the top of all the ruins that date back to New Testament times. And through the course of history, if there was an earthquake, some type of catastrophe, they would just basically level the city and build on top of it. And they would level the city and build on top of it. This is not too off the mark from Jerusalem. When you remember, the city of Jerusalem has been leveled 9 times through the course of history. And every time they have just kind of leveled everything off and built on top of it. And so archaeology in that region around Jerusalem is different from some of the, like the tells and the mounds that they excavate somewhere else. In Jerusalem, they go by layers. And the deeper they go, the far back. This is why around the Western Wall, you can look down and see parts of the wall that they believe dated back to the time of Solomon. But what's interesting about that is, and I know Vaughn and Carol have been there, others, you watch the Western Wall, which was the only remaining part of the temple. The higher you go, the stones get smaller and smaller. At the very base and even sub-level, they're as big as my office. But through the time in the rebuilding, they got quicker and quicker, and so the stones got smaller and smaller the higher they went in that regard. So the same thing is true with Smyrna. This, you look at the modern day city of Izmir, which is about 2 million plus, and archaeologists are not allowed to go in and tear down an existing building in order to look for ruins. So, that's basically it. This was the agora, or kind of like the business area. This is where they conducted business of the city, the city council, other meetings. We'll come back to this in a minute as far as a very important event that took place there. But there's another site, another look at it. You see the columns that were in that other picture are right there. There's the modern city, and that's it. It's kind of sad when you think about the city of Ephesus and the work that's continuing to go on there, particularly at the library and some of the other things, and you just don't have that at Smyrna. So let's follow the same approach that we did last week, and we'll go back to what Jesus says, and we'll talk about the correspondent. And who's the writer? Well, same one that wrote to Ephesus. And of course, this is the Lord Jesus. Verse 8 says, to the messenger from the church in Smyrna, write. And here he identifies himself this time as, as we saw back with the church at Ephesus, here Jesus addresses himself as the first and the last who was dead and has come to life. He's the one who says this. And, you think, okay, well, why would Jesus refer to himself that way? Why would he refer to himself as the first and the last who was dead and has come to life? And one commentator said it's in all likelihood Jesus' way of reminding the Christians there that he transcends time, he transcends space, he transcends creation. And yet, you look back at verse 8, he's the one who is eternal, who was before all things, who will live forever, and who transcends all things. Why? Because he was dead and he's come back to life. And one commentary I read said, this is the paradox of all paradoxes. How can the eternally living God, who is beyond all time and space and history, how could he die? Well, we know because Jesus was God in the flesh, and he entered time and space and history for 33 years, and the very purpose of that was to die, only to be resurrected. So the question is, why does he designate himself this way to this church? It's different than the way he addressed himself to Ephesus. It's going to be different with the succeeding, the rest of these 7 churches. Why does he identify himself this way? Probably, and it is, he doesn't say, but probably because of their persecution. He's saying to them, it's difficult. Time is very tough right now. You're living during a very, very difficult time. History has not been kind to you, and it's not going to be kind. And Jesus is just reminding them. I want you to know, I was here before all it started, and I'll be here when it's all over. I'm the beginning and the end, the first and the last. I transcend all of this. And by the way, he's reminding them that so do they, because of the relationship that they have with him. And by the way, in keeping in that phraseology, he's basically saying, you're worried about persecution, okay, but I know about dying. Why? Because I was dead. I was dead, and literally, the text there says, I became dead, and yet I came back to life. And so it's a very specific way that he identifies himself here because of the issues that are going on at this church. We don't know how the church at Smyrna was founded. The book of Acts says absolutely nothing about it. Paul doesn't reference the city of Smyrna in any of his letters. It is thought, because it's only 35 miles from Ephesus, the thought is that he, sometime during that 3 years that Paul spent at Ephesus, he planted the church at Smyrna. Or at least some of the converts from the church at Ephesus made their way to the north and began the church there at Smyrna. We just don't know. Like I said, 35 to 40 miles away from Ephesus, and it might have been one of the first churches that Paul established outside of the realm of Ephesus. But as little as we know about the church itself, we do know quite a bit about their history. And this church had, their entire existence, they were in constant danger because, for a number of reasons, not the least of which is emperor worship. Same thing that was going on at Ephesus, only it was a little more intensified here at Smyrna. And Smyrna had an unusual connection with the emperor. And we'll try to look at that in a few minutes. So it was so unique that historians tell us that in Smyrna there were mass executions of Christians who refused to declare Caesar as Lord. And we were talking about this a little bit last night. Emperor worship had always been around, but the difference was you did not worship the emperor until he was dead. They would wait, and after the emperor died, then he would be declared a deity. And then Domitian came along and said, yeah, I kind of want to be worshiped now. And so he was the one who really took emperor worship to that level. And you look then at even before that, when they put an idol to the Caesar in the temple in 68 and set off the Second Temple Rebellion. And this is part and parcel to that. And so it was really a emphatic part of Smyrna, to the point that there were mass executions at the height of Roman persecution. The word Smyrna, and there's a Smyrna, Tennessee. I don't know if every state has a Smyrna. It's an interesting word. The word literally means myrrh, of all things. And you know what myrrh is? Myrrh is a substance that was taken from actually looks like a thorn tree, and they would take the kind of a sap from that plant, and it was made for, used for perfume. Most of the time, it was used for burial purposes. And it was like an oily based, and I've got some in my office that Mark Gullion ran across somewhere, and it's not really a strong, smell. But evidently it was enough for that purpose. And you can look at other passages and look at and do a kind of a background study on myrrh in that regard. But and so that's what the city of Smyrna is named after. And yet the problem was, if it was named after something like that, they had a problem in the ancient city that when it rained, the sewers overflowed and just ran down the middle of the street. So it didn't smell like myrrh during big rains. The other part was to the west of the city, the sewage lines fed into the harbor, and the prevailing winds in that part of the world come from where? The west. And so it's kind of like, here in Guntersville, sometimes, and I know how much we rely on the poultry industry, but there are sometimes, particularly after a quick rain, sometimes you catch a whiff of the rendering plant, but after a rain, boy, it hangs heavy in the air. And Tim Black used to always say, don't complain about that smell because that's money. And he was right. And so it's just part of living here in that regard. So, the irony is the city of Smyrna is named after myrrh, but if they had a heavy rain, it didn't smell like myrrh. Let's talk about the city for just a little bit. The city itself, and here again, this is the second one of the 7 mentioned, and of all the 7, this was without a doubt the most beautiful. Most beautiful in what the Romans called Asia Minor, and as I said, Marcus Aurelius called it the crown of Asia. And not only because of the architecture, but because of the the topography of the area. It was beautifully laid out, and there were some really interesting background stories that history tells us. It's as old and as far back as history itself in that regard. There will, as I said, there will be a city and it'll be destroyed, and they'll build on top of it. And then they'll be destroyed, and on it goes. The city that would last the longest was rebuilt about 290 BC. So, that's about a 400-year time frame from 290 to about the time that John was receiving this vision. And as I said, Smyrna is still there, but it's underneath the modern-day city of Izmir. Ephesus, of course, is gone. Harbor is all silted up, but Smyrna lives. In fact, we do have indications of some Christians that are meeting rather covertly in, because Turkey is such a predominantly Muslim country. But there are Christians that meet in the area of Izmir in there. And of course, up the coast there, further south there at Dikili, which is another harbor city in modern-day Turkey. During Roman times, Smyrna was really quite a place. And as I mentioned, aside from the aromatic issues, it began, as I said, with a harbor that went 35 miles in, and the hillside there was covered with temples and with government buildings. It became a center for science, a center for medicine, and it was a free city. So important was the city of Smyrna that after it was destroyed by an earthquake, the Roman government did not levy any taxes for 10 years to give them a chance to rebuild. And so that was how important the city was, at least to the Roman authorities. I mentioned the strong emperor cult there. In fact, they executed people who did not worship the Caesar. And every year, every citizen, get this, every citizen had to burn incense on Caesar's altar in order to be issued a certificate. That certificate allowed them to conduct business in the city and buy and sell and basically just, operate. If you had a business, had to have a certificate. If you went in somewhere to buy goods, you had to have a certificate. And the only way to get the certificate was to, as we said, declare Caesar as Lord. And of all the people that refused to do that, about 50 years after the time of John, one of his remaining disciples, a man by the name of Polycarp, lived in Smyrna. Smyrna was his hometown. By the way, it was also the hometown of Homer, the Greek poet. And so Polycarp was a student, if you will, of John, and he was burned alive at the age of 86 because of his refusal to worship the emperor. And we'll come back to that in a minute. One writer said it was the 12th martyr in Smyrna when Polycarp was executed, and he had been there for. In fact, his protege was a man by the name of Eusebius, and Eusebius became one of the ante-Nicene fathers. In fact, one of the early authors of the second and third century. So you had John, then Polycarp, and then Eusebius. So that kind of leads us in from the city then to the commendation. What did Jesus say? The church at Smyrna did very well. And verse 9 says, "I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. I know your works." In other words, I know everything about you. You go back to chapter 1 here in the book of Revelation, how Jesus would move through the churches. John said he had eyes like what? like a flame of fire. He sees everything. And he says here, I know your tribulation. I know the pressure that you're under. And tribulation is the Greek word for pressure. I know the problems. And, that would not have been unlike what the Hebrew writer would say in Hebrews chapter 11. When you go back and read his description, verse 34 of Hebrews 11 says that certain believers there quenched the power of fire and escaped the edge of the sword. But others, verse 37, were stoned, sawn in two, tempted, put to death with the sword, went about in sheepskin, goatskins, and being destitute and afflicted, ill-treated, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. And that would have been unlike any other kind of suffering. And so, the question that we keep coming back to this, why were they persecuted? Well, obviously, the opposition to worshiping the emperor. So for 300 years, since 195 BC, a temple had been built there, and the Latin term was Dea Roma, which means God Rome. And Rome had been personified as a god. Actually, in that case, it was a goddess. And this temple had been built there about 195 BC, and that's where you could go and worship Rome. Seems kind of dumb. We would, I'm not going. I like Gatlinburg, but I'm not going to worship it, in that regard. But no, Rome itself was declared a goddess. So that temple had been built. And then Caesar then took on, as I mentioned a while ago, deity or deification, if you will, and so it became the center for emperor worship in that regard. So that's one thing. Secondly, they were engulfed in paganism. The city was filled with all kinds of temples and festivals and gods and goddesses, literally by the thousands. And that's hard to believe that there would be that many, but they did. But the real issue here, and Jesus alludes to it here in this paragraph, is it wasn't just emperor worship, it wasn't just paganism, but it's in that phrase, I know your tribulation, by those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. That's the third issue. It's not really surprising, because if you go back and remember in Paul's missionary journeys, the initial opposition that he got at any city was from whom? It's from the Jews. He would go to the synagogue, and as we were talking about in the introduction of the book of Philippians, that when Paul got to a city, he probably would have been better off to go and check out the city jail first, because he knew at some point that's where he was going to end up anyway. And it was because of the opposition from the Jews. And so here, it's not surprising. Why? Because they hated Jesus. They rejected him. They denounced his messiahship. And so, they took every opportunity to undermine and do whatever they could to resist. And in one of the most shocking statements ever made, here Jesus says that, they have a synagogue. They're members of a synagogue, but it's not a synagogue of God. It is, in fact, a synagogue of the devil. And that's quite a statement. And, if you go back to in the Gospel of John, Jesus said this of the Jewish leaders, that they were of their father, the devil. And when they lie because that's what he did. He was the liar, the very first liar, and the father of all lies. And so this group is dealing with some really, really difficult things. Not only the worship of the emperor, not only just the pagan environment, but now the group that you would have thought they would have had some connection No. Go back to verse 9. They say they are Jews, and they're not. Now that kind of poses the question, were they actually Jews? Well, the answer is yes. They were physically, right? They probably at one time had a synagogue that would look like a typical synagogue. They were Jews physically, but here Jesus says they say they are, but they're not. And Paul even, you go back to the book of Philippians, the first part of the 3rd chapter, he references this. And again, in Romans 2 and verse 28, he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, he is a Jew who is one inwardly. So in that sense, though physically, ethnically they were Jewish, they had become spiritual pagans. And these Smyrna Christians were being mercilessly slandered and physically persecuted, not just by the pagans, but by Jews. And there's no doubt that the description that Jesus gives here is accurate because of what they were doing. And in all likelihood, you had members of the synagogue, and you got to remember that particularly in Greek and Roman settings, Jewish synagogue was like a community center. It wasn't just a place of worship on the Sabbath. It was the heart and soul of the Jewish community. And one commentator said, yeah, these Jews probably would go once a year and claim Caesar as Lord in order to get their certificate. And then they'd go back to their synagogue and in their own association. So Jesus says this is not a synagogue of God. It was a synagogue of Satan, right?
And he also talks here about poverty and
Yep.
You just described what sounds to me like a very rich city.
Very.
It makes me wonder if they weren't poor all along, but that they were, financially rich at one point, but because of their loyalty to Jesus, that all got taken away.
It is. In fact, we're going to come back to that. There's an interesting word that is used to describe that kind of poverty, and it's exactly what you're alluding to. Let me read. There's some material that exists that gives us specifics about the martyrdom of Polycarp that I mentioned a while ago. And we know that he was executed about 155 or 156, which would have been about 50 years after John wrote this letter. And in a letter addressed by the church at Smyrna to the churches throughout the Christian world, it's related that the Jews joined with the heathen in clamoring that Polycarp should be cast to the lions or burned alive. And the Jews were foremost in bringing the wood and in the endeavor to prevent, and the reason they wanted him burned was so that his remains could not be taken by fellow Christians and buried. And so in the time of the public games, the city was crowded, the crowds were excited, and suddenly the shout went up, "Away with the atheist! Let Polycarp be searched for." Without doubt, Polycarp probably could have left. He could have escaped, but he didn't. His whereabouts were betrayed to the persecutors by a little slave girl who was tortured to the point that she collapsed. So she kind of gave it up where he was, and they went in and arrested him. Yes, sir.
Is it true that I've heard that Polycarp was told that he would deny Christ?
That's all.
That's all you got to do.
That's all you got to do.
Let you go.
That's it.
He said, "How can I deny the one who's been so faithful to me?"
And in addition to that, they were going to tie him up, and he told him, "You don't need to do that. I'm not going to go anywhere." When they the proconsul said, okay, well, we'll just burn you to death. And he said, you threaten me with the fire that burns for a time and is quickly quenched, but you don't know the fire that awaits the wicked in the judgment to come. And so he said, what are you waiting on? Just go ahead and do what you will. And so all the people came out, and they were about to bind and tie him to the stake. And he said, leave me as I am, for he who gives me power to endure the fire will grant me to remain in the flames unmoved. And even without the security you'll give by tying me. And so they left him untied, and of course there he perished in the flames. But this was, the culmination of the persecution leveled at the church. And the point is, the Jewish community there, they were as culpable as the pagans were, which is an interesting combination. They talk about religion and politics make strange bedfellows. Well, this is a classic example. Any other time, the Jews would not have had any involvement with the pagans in Smyrna. But they kind of got together to put to death an 86-year-old man that they viewed as a threat. So that's the part about I know your tribulation. And now, Brad, to your point about where he says, I know your poverty. I know your poverty. And they were poor. There are two Greek words that could have been used here. The first one basically means you're not wealthy. In other words, we would say today you live paycheck to paycheck. That would have been the word that would be used for. You're not rich, and in comparison to really wealthy people, they would say, yeah, well, compared to them, I'm poor. But it's the second word. The other option is the word that's used here, and it means destitute. It means you have absolutely nothing. It's not that you're just barely getting by. And the great contrast is, to Brad's point, there was a time when these people were probably at least in the upper middle class. But because of their conviction, because of their commitment in their faith, and they would not claim Caesar as Lord, they didn't get a certificate. They didn't get a certificate, so they couldn't conduct business. They couldn't buy the very basics. And there's indications that there probably was what we would call today a black market, where uncertified people could get the basics, but they didn't thrive. And Jesus uses a word here to describe absolute poverty. Most of them must have been slaves, and that added to their poverty as well. And so, slandered, robbed, plundered, accused, all these things fell into that category. And, every human reaction would have been, who needs this? All I got to do is do what a lot of these Jews have done, and that is get up there and just go through the motions and get the certificate and then go on. But they didn't do it. Notice what Jesus doesn't say to Smyrna. What did he say to Ephesus? They had lost. Yeah, he doesn't say that to this church. He doesn't say that. The phonies had been eliminated. The counterfeiters had been exposed. And, lines were drawn, and you had a small nucleus, a small group that refused to do that. I've got to go out to Dallas next Friday and speak to a foundation that supports funding for global missions. They support mission efforts all over the world, and I'm going to update them on what the status is in Cuba. And I'm not going to use the word beg, but I'm just going to strongly ask that they not, change anything. If they want to increase it, that'd be great. And received some information earlier this week, and I'm got to be careful how much I incorporate this, because it's gotten so bad there in Cuba. The military and the police are kind of putting out indications that they would be the ones, and it would have to be them, the military, police, anybody in any kind of authority would basically turn on the regime if they knew there would be outside support. And the question is, where would that come from? Because if history teaches us anything, it's gonna fall. The regime there is going to collapse. It will. And the prayer is that it happens without any bloodshed. But the other side of it is, when that all shakes out, there has got to be a nucleus of churches left in the country of Cuba. There's got to be, because that's their only hope. It can't be governments. It can't, because they're liable to just put in another dictator that's not a communist. So it can't be the government, and so we can't not do what we're doing right now. We're down to like 140 churches now, because so many people have left the country, and that's that's what's happening. So this is not a time to pull back, and of course I can't go out there and basically say, the military is ready to flip on the regime, because we don't know that. But there's more indications of that now than ever before, because even the military, they see what's happening to the population. Inflation now is one U.S. dollar is worth 420 Cuban pesos, and gas is $5 a liter. And they're 3-point-something liters to a gallon, so, do the math, $5 a liter. At one time, they were getting, I can't remember, 55,000 barrels of oil a day from Venezuela. That's dried up. Oddly enough, they're trying to keep China engaged. The government is. China has filed a $230 million lawsuit against the Cuban government for unpaid bills. So China's not going to be any help. And by the way, this is the dirty little secret. If our media would be upfront and honest, the American economy right now is the top economy in the world. The Chinese economy is rattled. They're on a downward spiral, and so. We're in a position to keep doing what we're doing, because if any part of the world would meet the description of poverty that Jesus references here, it would certainly be down there in that regard. Yes, sir. Yeah, it does. It looks it's built on just a smaller version of it.
They at one time had representative government.
Mm-hmm.
I hope they go back.
Well, that's what they'll have to do, and it's just and I'm relying on history. It can't. It won't last. It's going to implode at some point. So here we have this church that was persecuted and it was poor, but then Jesus says, kind of in a parenthetical statement, but what? But you're rich. You're rich. You're rich because you have what really matters. And you've got faith. You've got holiness. You've got love. You've got joy. You've got peace. All the fruit of the Spirit that would have been a part of that. So he says that from the standpoint of commending them, and then of course finally verse 10, the command. And you might think, go back to Ephesus, that he would say to them, I know you're suffering a lot. but it'll be over pretty soon. Doesn't say that. He just basically says what? I know it's tough, but there's more coming. And in fact, he uses the terminology here that's rather interesting. The text, this is probably one of the early references to apocalyptic language, because he says, behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Okay, there's no way that 10 days could be taken literally. No way. 10 days is an apocalyptic reference. It's used in the book of Daniel to just mean a certain amount of time. Jesus doesn't give them a specific, and so he just says, for a period of time, you're going to undergo tribulation. And this is why, and we'll have to kind of put a mark here. This is why when you study the book of Revelation, and as I said, I think we were talking about this the other night on Sunday night. That's what we may do if I ever finish the Gospel of Mark, because if you're consistent in your interpretation of it, it's really one of the easiest books in the New Testament. But you got to decide at the outset: are you going to take it figuratively or literally? You can't go back and forth. And if you decide, okay, I'm going to take it literally, okay, that's fine. You can do that, but you're going to run into some issues when you start talking about 144,000 being saved. Is that a literal number or is that figurative? So I'm of the opinion that when you study this book, you have to take it as figurative. And when you do that, and if you're consistent with it, it's really not that difficult at all. In that regard. Okay, we'll put a mark here and move our way from Smyrna on up to the next city, which is Pergamum, and some really, really good ruins there. And I'll try to get some up-to-date slides for that. So we'll pick up here next week. Thank you for being here.